Hello and welcome to an Our Fake History digital short. Today we are talking about the most audacious heist ever orchestrated in the Kaiser's Germany. Roll the theme. Hey everyone, my name is Sebastian Major and I am the host of Our Fake History. That's the podcast where we explore historical myths and try to determine what's fact, what's fiction, and what is such a good story that it simply must be told. Here on the digital shorts, I like to take a little something that we've been exploring on the longer audio podcast and serve it up in a more bite-sized video form. We are starting Season 9, and we are kicking it off by examining one of the most audacious and honestly hilarious heists ever orchestrated in European history. It takes place in 1906 in the small German town of Köpenick, Germany, which was a suburb just southeast of Berlin. In 1906, the German Empire was nearing the peak of its pre-World War I power and influence. The country was technically a constitutional monarchy, but unlike, say, the British system, in the German constitution, the Kaiser had considerably more executive power. Germany also possessed one of the most dominant militaries that Europe had ever seen up to that point in history. This had many inside the country and internationally fretting about a militaristic ideology that was seeping in to German culture. The question of just how much Imperial Germany was affected by militarism was hotly debated by people at the time and continues to be debated by historians to this very day. Still, in 1906, when an ex-con named Wilhelm Voigt disguised himself as an army captain, tricked a squad of soldiers to follow him, and robbed the town hall in the small town of Köpenick, many commented that the whole thing played like a type of satirical theater that revealed some uncomfortable truths about the role of the military in German society. So let me break this heist down for you. Wilhelm Voigt was a down-on-his-luck shoemaker who had spent most of his life in German prison. However, after being released after a 15-year hard labor sentence, he found himself unable to settle into a quiet life. This was because at the time in Imperial Germany, the police had the power to expel ex-convicts from their jurisdiction. In 1906, this happened to Wilhelm Voigt twice. On two separate occasions, he was forced out of a job and made to leave his home. So, in October of that year, with nothing left to lose, Voigt made his play. He observed the movements of a group of soldiers going to and from a barracks in Berlin for a number of weeks. Then he set about buying all the component parts of a captain's uniform. Significantly, the uniform that he cobbled together was for the 1st Foot Guards, who were stationed in Potsdam and not Berlin. This was a brilliant choice for a number of reasons. Historian Jeffrey Schneider explains, quote, "In selecting the uniform of a unit based in Potsdam, the fake captain gained the ability to roam Berlin and its environs without running in to an immediate superior or subordinate who might uncover his masquerade." End quote. So this costume gave him a certain ease of movement around the city. But on top of that, the 1st Foot Guards were also one of the most exclusive units in the German army. The 1st recruited its officers almost exclusively from the Prussian nobility, and they acted as the Kaiser's personal bodyguards. This meant that in the costume of a captain from the 1st Foot Guards, Voigt's cover story that he was acting on orders that came directly from the Kaiser seemed all the more plausible. Voigt also spent some time choosing the appropriate target for his robbery. Knocking over a spot in Berlin was far too risky, but he thought that he might be able to overawe the mayor of a small town. So he set his sights on a small town just southeast of Berlin, the growing suburb of Köpenick. On October 16th, 1906, Voigt donned his uniform, screwed up his courage, and made his move. First, he intercepted 2 squads of soldiers who were marching back to their barracks. This is where Voigt really distinguished himself as an actor. Summoning his most authoritative Prussian voice, he ordered the soldiers to halt. The men obeyed immediately. Then he told them that they had new orders to accompany him to the town of Köpenick. Now, you might be wondering why this whole charade didn't stop right here. Why did these men spring to attention for an officer they had never seen before? Well, the answer is that is what they'd been trained to do. Again, historian Jeffrey Schneider tells us, quote, complaining, questioning, or talking back to hierarchical superiors resulted in arrest, which could be increased to imprisonment for up to 3 years if done in front of others. End quote. So, questioning a superior officer even for a second was literally illegal for a soldier at the time. Those men snapped to it because nitpicking any perceived inconsistencies in a superior officer's uniform would have meant jail. So the small group of soldiers boarded a train and went with Voigt all the way to Köpenick, where they disembarked and marched on the town hall in perfect military order. He then commanded his soldiers to cover all the exits. Now, as you might imagine, having a group of soldiers occupy a town hall in Germany in 1906 was kind of a big deal. There were rumors floating around that a military coup in the name of the Kaiser might happen at any moment. Was this it? Some reports say that a crowd of thousands gathered around the Köpenick town hall that day after Voigt marched in. Now, that number might be exaggerated, but it's safe to say that there was a large crowd out front. To work crowd control, Voigt actually recruited the police constable who was on duty at the town hall that day. At trial and later in his autobiography, Wilhelm Voigt would relish the detail that he found the constable napping on duty when he arrived. After waking him, the fake captain reported that, quote, I asked him whether the good city of Köpenick is paying him to sit around here and doze. If you would be so kind to proceed outside and see that the necessary order is maintained in the streets and no disturbances interfere with traffic. End quote. The embarrassed police officer sprang to attention and headed outside to keep the crowd from getting unruly. Voigt then marched up to the mayor's office, where he confronted the mayor of Köpenick. This was a man named Dr. George Langerhans. In this whole debacle, Langerhans was the only person who pushed back at all against the orders of this alleged captain. Voigt told the mayor that he was under arrest, but Langerhans was not so easily cowed. Again, Jeffrey Schneider explains, quote, as a trained lawyer and a co-editor of the 5th edition of a reference work on Prussian law, Langerhans knew to demand some kind of written proof for his arrest, and likely knew that neither the criminal code nor the military code provided for the military arrest of a civilian or even a reserve officer who was not currently on active duty. End quote. Now, this could have stopped the whole heist in its tracks. But this is where Voigt really showed his genius as a con man. First, when Langerhans demanded to see some authorization for his arrest, Voigt barked back, quote, "These troops are my authorization," end quote. Langerhans then tried to appeal to the fake captain as a fellow soldier, revealing that he had been a lieutenant during his time in the Army Reserves. When Voigt heard this, he pivoted quite brilliantly, realizing that flattery might be a better approach. So, the mayor was a lieutenant? Well, that's exactly why he, a captain, had been sent to arrest him. it would have been embarrassing if a lieutenant had been arrested by another lieutenant. So here he was, a captain, doing this work out of respect for the mayor's military rank. This approach seemed to soften Langerhans. Voigt then had the mayor swear on his honor as a lieutenant that he would not flee the building. According to Jeffrey Schneider, quote, "It's worth noting that Voigt also showed the mayor the additional courtesy of sending a soldier to fetch his wife from their apartment above and permitting her to accompany her husband in the carriage, transporting him to the guardhouse in Berlin, suspecting, correctly it seems, that she would both encourage her husband to acquiesce to his demands while also distracting him from seeing through the deception." End quote. So this was Voigt's real talent. Not only did he play the part of the gruff Prussian officer perfectly, but he knew how to improvise. He knew when to show the mayor some softness, when to flatter his ego, and how to use his wife as a distraction. This is a master class in grifting. With the mayor now acquiescing, Voigt then marched to the treasurer's office, where he had the treasurer cash out everything that was in the safe. The treasury had just over 4,000 marks on hand. Voigt made a big show of ceremoniously counting it all out, and then he confiscated it. Once Voigt had the cash, he had his soldiers requisition a carriage and a driver. He then loaded the mayor, his wife, and the treasurer into the carriage and ordered them to report directly to the Neue Wache, the Royal Guard House in Berlin. Any further questions they had about this whole affair would be answered there. Once the carriage had departed, Voigt exited the building and had his soldiers peacefully disperse the crowd. Once the commotion had died down, he dismissed his 10 soldiers with orders that they return to Berlin immediately and proceed directly to their barracks. Voigt then slipped away. He waited long enough for the soldiers to leave the city. Then he changed out of his costume and caught a train back to his sister's house in the capital city. By the time Mayor Langerhans arrived at the Berlin guardhouse, Voigt had made good his escape. Within a few hours, it became clear that the mayor, the soldiers, and the citizens of Köpenick had all been fooled by a clever impostor. This had been a robbery. Within a day, the story was all over the German papers, and the now famous Captain of Köpenick was still at large. Voigt may have even gotten away with it had it not been for an old partner in crime named Kallenberg. Hoping to get a reward, Kallenberg, who remembered that his old friend had once fantasized about using soldiers in a heist, snitched on Voigt. His tip led the police directly to their man, and Voigt was arrested after 10 days on the lam. But the story of the Captain of Köpenick didn't end there. The heist became the talk of Germany, and soon Wilhelm Voigt was being celebrated as a kind of folk hero. Some saw his caper as an indictment of German militarism, as it illustrated just how easily a man in uniform could rob with impunity. However, others in Germany saw the escapade quite differently, and argued that if the mayor and others at the town hall had been better soldiers, they would have seen through the charade immediately. This debate would reveal just how deep the political fault lines were in Imperial Germany. To get deeper into the story of the fake Captain of Köpenick, then please listen to the audio version of Our Fake History. You can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And to hear more stories just like this, then please like and subscribe to this YouTube channel.